We now have on the line, we've been joined by Ruth Wasserman-Lande, who's a former Israeli member of parliament for the Blue and White Party, and a former advisor to the last Israeli president, Shimon Peres. Ruth, hello and welcome.
Thank you.
Can I first of all ask you for your reaction and your thoughts on the ceasefire now agreed and about, one presumes, about to be approved by the Israeli cabinet?
So the ceasefire is met with a lot of skepticism amidst the Israeli public because we are talking about a ceasefire de facto with a designated terrorist organization, the Hezbollah. So there is a lot of skepticism about the fact that it will hold true to the actual ceasefire agreement. What the IDF has found until now is huge amount of armament and huge readiness in terms of training and underground tunnels, etc. Very, very ready to perform what had been performed already by the Hamas from the Gaza Strip on October 7th. So there is a fear amidst the civilians to go back to their homes. That's number one. Second of all, there's been also a declaration by the Lebanese government, by the Lebanese army, that they will not actually go into war with the Hezbollah if there is a misstep in the ceasefire. I don't believe because they don't want to necessarily, but because perhaps they are afraid or unprepared. There is a tiny light that the committee that is to check every misdemeanor is in fact comprising Americans, British, if I'm not mistaken, the French and also Israeli representatives, as well as the Lebanese. However, there is a huge skepticism also amidst the mayors of the cities in the north of the country, who actually just came out of a meeting with the Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, regarding the reason why this ceasefire was signed so quickly and before there was even a stronger hand taken against the Hezbollah in Lebanon.
And what's your reading of that then? Those who are sceptical on that point, on the speed with which the ceasefire is agreed, what is their concern? What is their suspicion?
So they're very, very suspicious and very, very skeptical that the Hezbollah would hold to their word. In fact, from past experience, they simply take the time to rearm, to embed themselves in civilian population amidst the Lebanese themselves. By the way, this has been very much evident, especially since the Israeli IDF has taken arms against the Hezbollah and begun this war. But also there's a huge, you must understand that Israeli civilians are all day, every day in the shelters with our kids, with the dogs, with the families, because the Hezbollah has been raining rockets on our heads all the time.
Yeah.
And this has been going on since October 8th. So for over a year, the entire Israeli population is being bombarded. The only reason why we don't see unbelievable, tragic mass death here is because the Israeli government, and to which, by the way, politically I don't belong, but any Israeli government has taken care to have air protection against missiles. And also we are really indoctrinated in the sense of go into the shelters as soon as you hear the sirens.
Yeah, I mean, your suspicion about Hezbollah makes, I would say, clearly perfect sense when you consider that Hezbollah is dedicated to the destruction of Israel. But when you look at the ceasefire having been agreed, when you look at the words of the Israeli Prime Minister, when you look at the guarantees or the support for the ceasefire coming from, among others, America as well as the Lebanese government, do you now expect to see Israelis moving back in numbers to those northern areas, to their homes there, in the hope and expectation of at least some sort of long-lasting cessation of hostility?
No, I don't see that happening immediately. I feel that I need to reiterate the skepticism. There needs to be, first of all, a 60-day interim period in which the Lebanese army gradually should be taking its positions in the south of Lebanon. Again, there's a lot of skepticism amongst the Israelis vis-a-vis the Lebanese army as well, not because there's any sentiment against Lebanon, but because the army has said and declared that it will not fight the Hezbollah. And Israelis, as they said, it's been a year of bombardment. This is, by the way, not the first time. People living in the north have grown up into these bombardments and rain of rockets onto their heads. So there is a huge amount of skepticism. It will take time. And quite frankly, I can tell you that it won't be too long until there is a misdemeanor on the side of Hezbollah, because you yourself had said the raison d'etre, the very reason for existence of the Hezbollah is radical Islamist ideology, and that is not only the destruction of the state of Israel, but the destruction of anything that is not radically Islamist.
In that sense, the ceasefire will be seen as a ceasefire, not a peace, because a peace is scarcely imaginable. Before you leave us, Ruth, just very briefly, I want to move on to this in a moment. What about Gaza? The Israeli leader talking about his aim still being the total destruction of Hamas. What does that mean? How is the total destruction of Hamas defined? How can it be achieved?
Okay, so first of all, we have a very, very significant front in the Gaza Strip, first and foremost and before everything else, because we still have 101 hostages. Before these hostages will be back, there will be no end of this war. There's no question about that. The Israeli public will not cease to fight even against its own government in terms of demonstrations, etc., in order to make sure that these hostages will be back. And the Hamas, by the way, the operatives, or rather the remnants of the Hamas, after the destruction that Israeli defense forces have wrought onto the Hamas structures, and they are not total, by the way. There's still a huge infrastructure of underground tunnels, which are very, very difficult to destroy. We've been there for a long time. It'll still take a long time. But what is happening right now is that there are still thousands of warriors, of Hamas operatives, bearing armaments and pledging to destroy Israel, that are actually embedded in civilian population in Jabalia. Now, one needs to understand the proximity of the northern part of the Gaza Strip to the Israeli villages and towns. This is the part that is closest to the Israeli villages and towns, and this needs to be cleaned out. Otherwise, the de facto buffer zone that has been enacted inside Israel, because nobody will live there. Nobody will take the chance of taking their kids
All right,
there.
Ruth. Okay, that raises more questions, which I hope to try to explore in the time that remains on this programme. Ruth Wasserman-Lande, former Israeli Member of Parliament, thank you so much for your contribution to this developing story. We can now talk to Hunter Williamson, who's a journalist speaking to us live on the line from Beirut in the suburb of Sin Al Fin. Hunter, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
You're very, very welcome. Can I just start by asking you for your perspective on the announcement of this ceasefire? We'll wait for the Israeli cabinet to formally endorse the ceasefire. But we have heard from the Israeli leader, Benjamin Netanyahu, who spoke in terms of having effectively, destroyed, set back Hezbollah as a force decades. So something of a military victory there. How is that going to be seen in Lebanon, and how is it going to be depicted by Hezbollah, Hunter?
Right. So for Hezbollah is still saying that it has essentially won this war. That Israel, by not defeating it, essentially means it has won. Since it escalated back in September, and Israel launched a ground offensive into southern Lebanon, Hezbollah has repeatedly put out statements, videos and photos saying that is repelling Israeli offensives and assaults into southern Lebanon. All the while, Israel has slowly and incrementally destroyed and razed villages across southern Lebanon, while also heavily bombing Beirut, especially the southern suburbs of Beirut, where Hezbollah has a strong presence. And Israel has also been launching a lot of airstrikes in other parts of Lebanon, including the eastern Bekaa Valley and Baalbek area, where Hezbollah has a strong presence as well. So Hezbollah has been getting hit very, very hard. And while they have acknowledged that at times, they've refused to accept any sort of notion that they are losing on the battlefield.
Yes.
To them, they are still very much winning this war, and of course, they will push back against any assertion by the Israeli government otherwise.
And Hunter, then, what is your own assessment of the truth of this? Because with the Lebanese government taking part in this, is policing this management of the ceasefire and moving into that southern Lebanon area, with America taking a hand, the CENTCOM military command of America overseeing this process too, and others outside the region. Is it fair to say that Hezbollah has been, at least for the foreseeable future, at least for now, neutralized as a threat to Israel?
I think time will really tell about just how much Hezbollah has been set back. Certainly, by them agreeing to terms to withdraw to the north of the Litani River, this is going to certainly create some geographical space between Israel and Hezbollah. I mean, Hezbollah had for decades been building up military infrastructure, underground tunnels along the Lebanese-Israeli border. For them to be pushed back north above the Litani River, that is a blow to them, but it should also be noted that their rocket capabilities are far-reaching. I know from my reporting on the ground that that Hezbollah has been launching rockets from far north into Lebanon, into the Bekaa Valley area. So it's much farther north of the Litani River. So if Hezbollah still wants to attack Israel, it will have the capabilities and means to. The question is whether or not Hezbollah still has sort of the appetite, and even more so whether Iran has the appetite for Hezbollah to continue with any sort of hostilities with Israel.
The Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says he'll bring a proposal for a ceasefire between Israel and Hezbollah before his cabinet tonight. He spoke earlier and says Israel could still resume fighting in the region, even if the deal is agreed.
The duration of the ceasefire depends on what happens in Lebanon. We have an understanding with the United States. We are maintaining our full liberty to take military operations. If Hezbollah tries to attack us, if it arms itself, if it rebuilds infrastructure next to the borders, we will attack them. If they launch missiles, if they dig tunnels, we will attack.
Well, it comes after a number of Israeli strikes on Beirut in Lebanon earlier today, and actually reports this evening of continued strikes in central Beirut tonight. In a moment, we'll be joined by Olivia Le Poidevin, a reporter at L'Orient du Jour. Earlier, this is what she recorded at the moment that one of those strikes hit the centre of Beirut. So very, very heavy attacks indeed. Let's connect now with Olivia Le Poidevin, reporter at L'Orient du Jour. Olivia, we heard what you recorded earlier there. Just tell us what the situation is now. I understand that there have been intensive strikes today.
Yeah, good evening. Well, there has been a really, really heavy day of strikes here in Beirut, across the city, not just in the southern suburbs where there have been a lot of strikes in the past few months targeting what Israel describes as Hezbollah targets there, but also in central parts. Just before actually speaking to you in the past 20 minutes, there was another strike in Hamna, which is a very central part of the city, very densely populated and filled with tens of thousands of people who've been displaced from other neighborhoods in Beirut. And it's been a theme throughout the day. I mean, Benjamin Netanyahu, Israel's prime minister, did say that in kind of no such terms that he would be, continuing bombardments right up until a ceasefire, and that is essentially what we're seeing. And we're also hearing tonight that there's probably going to be more strikes during the evening, and even the kind of start of the ceasefire that we're expecting tomorrow morning might even be pushed back a bit later into tomorrow, because Israel says there are still Hezbollah targets that it wants to hit. And the kind of atmosphere that I can describe now is just one of panic, deep stress, people fleeing from one side of the city to the other. And even though there is kind of hopeful news in terms of this war coming to at least a pause for 60 days, hopefully a longer term end, people can't yet relax. And even speaking to you now, right now in air, there's a drone flying over my head, and I'm only a few kilometers away from where we're expecting some more strikes tonight.
Well, please do go if you need to. I mean, what is the advice out there? Just, take us into your apartment right now, Olivia. You can hear a drone flying overhead. There's been intensive strikes today. They're set to escalate even further and go on until the morning. But what are you to do in this situation?
Yeah, well, I think this is the very difficult thing about the situation, that, Beirut's a very small, densely populated city, and though I'm in a relatively safe area, because of the size of the city, these strikes are only happening within a couple of kilometers from one neighborhood to another. So though I hear them very intensely, my windows shake, and it's pretty scary. Fingers crossed my area is safe. There's not been any kind of evacuation warnings that have been issued by the Israeli army in other areas. There are none here. So I can consider myself relatively safe, but only just 5 minutes down the road in other neighborhoods, it's a completely different story. And that is also why we're seeing this panic tonight, because some areas that have not yet been struck throughout this conflict have been targeted, leaving people very little time, less than an hour, to gather their things and get out. And that is why the pressure here for a ceasefire has been so strong and so immense from across all spectrums of kind of political backgrounds and communities. People really here have had enough, and the country is on its knees, both socially and financially. And that is why eventually, when the ceasefire does begin, people will start to be able to either return to their homes, or at least just have a few days of peace and quiet without having to worry about where the next strike is going to be.
Yeah, and that'll be the case in northern Israel as well, presumably. Just set out the terms of the deal for us, Olivia. What are we talking about here? We know it'll be up to 60 days. Could, as long as approval, which we expect it to be given tonight by the full Israeli cabinet, as long as that takes place, it's set to begin tomorrow. What else do we know about the terms of the deal?
Yeah, indeed. And it's important what you mentioned there about northern Israel. Netanyahu said tonight that he won't end the war until all Israelis living in the north have been able to return to their homes. They have, like hundreds of thousands of people here in Lebanon, have also been displaced for over a year from their homes because of Hezbollah rockets being fired into northern Israel and beyond. Essentially, what this deal calls for is for both sides to withdraw in the next 60 days. We're probably looking at a kind of progressive retreat of Israeli forces from the south of Lebanon, where they launched a ground invasion in the last month. But also at the same time, Hezbollah is being asked to move north of what is known as the Litani River, a key kind of strategic area that breaks up the south of the country, where up to now it has been able to run fairly freely in terms of having its arms based there, and also military personnel. Essentially, in this deal, what we'll see is the Lebanese army, who up until now have been a very small force with very limited means, they will now be empowered to disarm Hezbollah, but also to patrol this area in the south of Lebanon, which Israel sees as a real threat to its national security. They'll be supported by some kind of monitoring mechanism, which France will oversee alongside the United States. But crucially, and this has been a big sticking point in these negotiations, Israel will reserve the right to strike Hezbollah if it deems and if it finds evidence that Hezbollah is starting to rearm. And that is really the key fear, both among political parties opposed to Hezbollah and also among people in Israel, is the fear that Hezbollah, even under this ceasefire agreement, could rearm and could launch further attacks. And vice versa, on the Lebanese side, people are worried that Israel and Netanyahu might find new targets to strike, meaning that the war could start all over again.
Right.
So we'll start with the 60 days and we'll see what happens. But certainly things are tense. But also there is enormous domestic pressure for this deal to work, because really the country is on its knees.
Yeah, it is very similar, follows the contours really of the UN Security Council Resolution 1701. It ended the 36-day Israel-Hezbollah war of 2006, never fully implemented, and that is why we are where we are. Olivia, thanks so much for being with us. Do keep us posted, won't you? Please stay safe. There are more strikes on the way, as we understand it. That is a distinct possibility, as Olivia has been reporting to us this evening. More strikes on the way in Lebanon, southern Lebanon, and in Beirut as well. Across Beirut, Israel says it still has targets to find, Hezbollah targets, before that ceasefire deal, if it's completely approved, which it should be, comes into place tomorrow.